What's up, guys? It's DK. Welcome to Thorn's YouTube channel. Why are you even here, though? Didn't you know Ginger Man bad?
This is the newest episode of my Patreon AMA, which takes place monthly. At the moment, I'm doing kind of twice monthly to catch up from the past. Again, I will just emphasize this. If you are a past patron who donated $10 or more in the past, but was on one of the months where I didn't get one of these done, feel free to send me a message through Patreon. I can check this sort of thing and just send me a question. Add one in and we'll get it done and you'll get included as well. I also reached out to many of you. It's just that some of them, I assume when they stop being patrons, just never logged into Patreon again. So if you go and check there, a bunch of you will actually have messages where I ask you if you want to contribute a question to one of these. So anyone who donates $10 or more, one of the tiers is they get to submit a question to this AMA. Now, as you'll find out later in this AMA, it's an ask me anything, but it absolutely is not a I will answer anything. And I often point out where my boundaries are and where I don't want to step forwards. Anyway, the first question was actually asked by a couple of people in the same one. It's just that in different words. So essentially, Konzi and Peyton Lee Trahan asked some variant. Well, I'll just ask the longer version. It says, Team Liquid are meant to be one of the top contender teams and seem to be in a slump/downwards trend. Would you say it is down to the effects of COVID limiting competition, or that they could benefit from a stronger coach or maybe even a player, say for example, adding Kassad as a coach instead of a Dren? Now, and as I say, someone else asked something quite similar. So basically the question is about like Team Liquid, where they're at, what they could do. And as usual, the focus goes to the coaching part because no one really knows what a Dren does. I always thought he just essentially kept them on point with basic tactical things, which as far as I can tell is what he does. And as I said, when I was at Blast Spring and I could hear the comms, I was very underwhelmed by what I heard. Like just the absence at times. So yes, it's often been my contention that the first thing I would do is actually change coach. And yes, Kassad, in my opinion, the only person I consider better than him as a coach is Zonic. And even then, I consider Zonic better for Astralis. I don't know if Zonic would be better for other teams, actually. So I think Kassad has a contention to be the best coach in the world. I think it's fantastic. I think if you look at who he's worked with, the fact that they're totally different nationalities, he's worked with a couple of different teams around the world, different squads. For me, he just cuts the mustard. This guy is just incredible. So yes, Kassad would be the coach I would bring in because he's a no-nonsense coach. He's worked with people who had more laid-back and quieter personalities before. He's brought them to another level. He gave them an edge to their game they just never had before. You would have never thought that 100 Thieves/Renegades lineup would have the success they did, even from when their initial results came along. And a lot of that, in my opinion, goes down to him. And I'll be very surprised if they ever get back with the same five-man lineup to that kind of a level again. So I feel like Kassad would be the perfect coach. As far as I can tell, though, Team Liquid has no interest in this at all. I don't think the players have any interest in it. I think the players and the org are happy with the Dren. For some reason, as an org, they actually seem pretty happy with the lineup they have. Like, there aren't rumours, despite what that nonsense bullshit journalism thing you heard last year was, about, like, players want to leave Team Liquid. I've heard that about EG players, and there was a small rumour about one EG player, and then even then, that was months ago, and that guy seems totally happy again now. So I personally think they won't make any change. I do think they should, though, in as much as I've seen enough now that I don't really feel like this five-man lineup with this coach is going to ever be number one again. I don't even know, like they still certainly have the capacity to win tournaments, but the fact that they haven't, it also makes me skeptical they'll do much in terms of winning. Like that's the saddest part. At least want to be like a super dangerous dark horse, like EG was at certain times, and maybe could be again one day. So I would also say the slump/downward trend already began after the player break. So before the major even began, I think you already saw them lose some of that magic. No, it's not because Astralis is back and they were trying at the major. Like, if we go down silly paths like that, all I can do is make funny content where I make fun of that or in a very bombastic way explain my points. But I won't engage with silly topics like that because what it says basically is let's not analyze the game. Let's not look at different factors. Let's not consider things that you don't want to be the case as possible. Let's only limit things to one or two simple, very simplistic opinions and, quite frankly, very weak analytical lenses. So I would say say the rot had set in a long, long time ago. I'm not sure what that means. It sounds like psychologically something went on in that team, which is also why I feel like Adren isn't the right coach. I don't feel like he's equipped to do that. I've never followed him in Source, so I can't say what sort of leader he was there. But in CSGO, he was never the kind of leader who even addressed those topics. Never mind had the skill set for it or had like a strong voice in that way. He just doesn't. Like, I don't care what people say. I have information and access to knowledge you people don't. Like, one thing people never bother to understand is this. There are literally pro players who publicly will say I'm lying or I'm wrong, who privately were the ones who told me that information. But because I don't use their name and because I don't say, well, you're lying because you told me, because that would be to betray their confidence, that I have to just take the hits. And that's part of being a journalist, is that every time you speak an uncomfortable or inconvenient truth, you get filled full of bullets and you're supposed to just forget it and even then just trust these people again and go on with your life. Now, that's where I'm very different. And a lot of people get angry with how I respond to players because I don't just forget it. I don't just say, well, that's cool that you've just lied and smeared me. I hold that against these people. But I don't break my own code of ethics. So what I would basically say is I would also do a player change at this point in time. Like, there'll be a question later, so maybe I'll go in more depth there. But I think for me, I would either take out Stewie 2K, just because I feel like his attempt to solve problems, which is to make even more players when it's not working, I feel like this just isn't the squad for that. Like, they're not giving you the follow-up, dude. It's not that what you're trying's bad. I can even see, like, I even admire on some level the notion, which I've always believed in esports, of like, I'll never let myself get slowly choked out of a game and just constantly take like 20-80 fights over and over again, 30-70 fights and just lose in the most inconvenient way ever, which is what Team Liquid does to Astralis every time. I'd much rather go, right, you know what, if this game isn't going my way, fuck it. I'm going to make this so chaotic that a bunch of these scenarios that you have to take because the way I'll approach them actually end up being like 45-55 in your favour, but that's way better than what would happen otherwise. And listen, I'll take the hits as long as I get hits of my own and I'll make you really feel like you were in a fight, where sometimes the way Team Liquid loses, I could imagine Astralis genuinely afterwards. If you remember, they always used to tweet Team Liquid and be like, great job, like, oh, good, amazing match. Like, I could imagine they were just laughing in teams, be like, this is amazing. These guys just give us the championship every time. I wish the EG fuckers would play this way, but EG didn't play that way. So I personally would change Stewie. Like, I feel like you could put a different player in there that could maybe do something in terms of like IGLing and being an entry that could be interesting. I also feel like Nitro, I actually think he should be removed at this point in time. He's not a good enough AWPer. He doesn't do enough fragging. He's not a good enough IGL. He doesn't particularly seem to IGL as far as I can tell. So listen, I don't care that he's been in the org a long time and they will be overly loyal to him, believe me. I think it's just time to say yes and thank you for all your service. Here's a brilliant gold watch on the way out. Now guess what? Stewie can go to any team he wants to, but if you're Nitro, go and play in Gen G or go and play in Cloud9. These teams might even pay you and you can become a star again if you want. Or if you want to be an IGL, get a team that allows you to do your style of IGLing, because I don't think his style of IGLing is very good in this squad. And I actually don't even think it worked that well in the summer. I think it's just that they really did play at such an individual level, which they could do again, but they just haven't. Again, I think psychological and coaching, that without that style, I mean, I don't think he's bringing enough to the team. One of the hallmarks of the great IGLs is they can even do things when their players are out of form and their style doesn't even work or isn't conducive to the current meta. So, Matt Shakowski says, there is a narrative that Counter-Strike is 90% aim. There is also another narrative that young players with incredible aim have a tough time at the start of their careers once they play against top professionals. My question is, what actually happens to these young players when they get on the server that gives them so much trouble? For example, does their aim decline due to nerves/pressure? Is the positioning by the top pros so good it overcomes most discrepancies in aim, etc.? He's done that thing again, which, listen, I don't hate on you. You guys aren't professional interviewers, but like, it feels like he wants me to just say yes to all those things. So I'll just do this, right? First of all, the narrative that Counter-Strike is 90% aim. I mean, as far as I can tell, that's largely pushed, not even by Counter-Strike players, but by people from other games who think because they played Counter-Strike a few times in matchmaking or in 1.6 when they were 12 or 14, that like they know Counter-Strike. Now think how outrageous that would be. Imagine coming into League of Legends and saying, think about League of Legends is, and making these bold pronouncements. And then when people say, well, what do you know about League of Legends? You go, well, I played in Season 3 and I was in fucking Gold. It's like, why are you talking then? What do you don't, what, you're an expert now. So first of all, I've never thought it was 90% aim. Not least because if it was 90% aim, I mean, an obvious example, if you have a good eye test, you're going to know what I mean. If you don't, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go away and learn some techniques to understand aim. Config would never be outside of the top 10 players in the world if Counter-Strike was 90% aim. And actually, at his peak, he would have been the best player in the world along with Simple. That is not an exaggeration. I would suggest you go and watch some POVs of his and see, even when he's having bad games, some of the shots that this guy hits and how he like consistently aims with his crosshair and the angles he can take as a result of his aim. So it isn't 90% aim. Like if I had to guess, listen, this is off the top of my head and I'm sure I've probably answered this in a past AMA, so I'll just go roughly. Listen, just like in football, yeah, getting goals is a massive part of the game. Let's say getting goals is 80% of football. Like possession, etc., is way less important. In the same sense, getting frags might be 80% of Counter-Strike, but aiming isn't how you get frags necessarily. It's the most obvious way, and in theory, it's the way where if you have exceptional aim, it's going to be easiest, but actually the best way to get frags is to position yourself correctly, to work with teammates, to use utility, to have knowledge of the opponent, to have knowledge of the map, to understand the current meta game. That is why, to me, when Get Right was the best player in CSGO, just like when Cold Zero was, I was watching a master. I was watching someone who had, at that moment, seemed to understand every facet of the game and their game. And as a result, it didn't matter. These guys were not the best aimers or more skilled players. They were the best players or the best players in their teams. And that's the key aspect. So then in terms of the other narrative that like young players with incredible aim have a tough time, yeah, listen, it's fairly obvious. First of all, when we say they have incredible aim, well, we're seeing that incredible aim against tier 2 and tier 3 opposition or matchmaking, right? And then they go against top professionals. This is an area I understand why fans are going to have a hard time with this, because until you've actually experienced this yourself, you'll probably never understand it. But if you go into a PUG or a matchmaking game that isn't pros, and you put a pro that you think has bad aim from watching the pro scene, they will look like one of the best aimers in the server and they will dominate. I'm talking about if I took washed up Fiflara at the end of his NIP career where he was posting terrible stats, but they would still sometimes win anyway, and I put him in a mid-tier matchmaking game, he might have the best aim in the server. Now, I'm not literally like, listen, someone else might have better tracking, but like he would get the most kills, he would dominate, he would do 1v3s, he would win aim duels, and part of that is because like his raw aim would be enhanced by all these other aspects, and so you would think he had the best aim. Like if I'm positioned correctly and you come out a corner and you have to aim from across the screen, you need to actually maybe have 10 times better aim than me. But I get the kill instantly on your head, and so if you're watching the POV, you go, I had the better aim, I won the duel. It's like, there's a lot more to the game than that. So I would say that when these young players get to the top level, it's like players coming out of college in basketball or American football. Think how rare it is that they are dominant or even top players when they come out. Because most of the time when they come out, like if they're a big guy, they were dunking over people who weren't big enough or didn't know how to play defense. If they were a small guy, they were too used to only using speed to beat the guy, or they could get their shot off because people didn't properly defend them or use actual zone defense against them in the tactical way that they would in the NBA or NFL, etc. So I would just say, it's a different game at the top level. You're playing a totally different meta game and you're expected to play differently, including by your teammates and the opposition. And I would also say nerves and pressure definitely affects them. Like that tends to affect everyone, quite frankly. It's very rare. This is why the whole angle of like, I only call people chokers typically when they really choke a lot. I don't call them it when they just like sometimes don't win or have a bad game. Like that happens to most human beings, including pro players. It's very rare that you get the guy like a Cold Zero, actually, who never seems to choke in the big moment. Like, that's the rare thing, not the guy that does choke. So I would say, yes, nerves and pressure affects everyone. It just tends to affect them more because they're younger, they're less experienced, they haven't gotten comfortable. Remember, exposure therapy, I don't know if it's a real thing, but it certainly seems like an efficacious model, put it that way. In terms of, like, positioning, yeah, that's another massive deal. They also, remember, when they've studied your demos, will position and attack you differently. Like, the best example to me would be go and watch that major series in the semi-final between Astralis and NRG, now EG, and the Starlighter Berlin Major. Go watch Cirque play CT side of Overpass. I haven't ever done like a demo review. Maybe in the future I'll do something like that. But when I watched this game, most angles he took were good angles. Most fights he took were good fights against other top teams. Against Astralis in that game, you could see that they had studied what he was doing, where he would be, how he would play. The way that they used utility to flash him off, to have a smoke down so he had to reposition, attack in ways that meant he couldn't just get all his kills off, or that if he got a kill, it committed him to dying immediately and being traded, and then they could take the site, which was the B site. Like, I even told him privately, and I've said this publicly, like, that's a game where I don't want you to think you are a bad player or you played badly. I just want you to go away and study the game and understand that you have to, just like Device, know where your normal positions are, and in a game against an opponent clearly reading you, know how to switch it up. So I would say that's a massive deal as well. And then I'd also throw in as well, finally, I would just say that when people say aim, it is also always attenuated by technique. Like, I personally think Lekro is a very good example of a player whose aim is overrated, because his raw mechanical aim, as you see with the Deagle, looks like it is really good. But when I see him fire with other weapons, I feel like he actually hasn't mastered the right techniques and hasn't fit his playing style to what he could be as a player. Like, I feel like if I had his skills and my brain and his body, I could be the best player in the world. Or, listen, maybe that's too far because Simple and Nico and the rest of them exist now. I could be a top 10 player in the world. Now, I don't know if you think Lekro was ever a top 10 player in the world. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think he was even top 20 ever personally. But that's just a way to explain it and model it. Soliko. Where the distinction between star and superstar lies as a general idea. You mentioned previously that Breezy from EG was a superstar, not because he had crazy highlights. By the way, he does, but I just mean that wasn't the reason. But because he would never miss the easy kills presented to him, for example. So is a superstar more consistent, aim/sprays better, has better game sense? Do they need to rely much less at fucking hell? Why is it always like multiple choice, guys? Like, I know, listen, you know what, fair enough. Maybe for fans listening, this will help to like give potential solutions. So do they need to rely much less on the team around them? All of the above. Where's the cutoff for regular stars in which they become... First of all, it's no hard and fast rule. It's a subjective opinion. I would never claim, and I almost never would, that opinions about the game can be even objective. They're only objective because that colloquially people believe that means like it involves no personal bias. It's objective in the sense that the real meaning of objective is you just look for what is there, no matter what your bias is, no matter what you believe, no matter what you would like to be true, and you just see what is there. In that sense, I try to make my opinions like that. But even then, I try because I'm just a human. So I would say there is no hard and fast cutoff. This is my philosophy and how I apply it. So I believe I might have done a video in the past, but I don't fucking know if I can find it, on the distinction between star players and superstars, because purposely, and this is a very key thing that other people do not do, which is one of the reasons I think my work endures, I have always kept that as a distinction. Like other people use star, superstar, leader, best player, top player, just so interchangeably and so loosely that it actually loses all meaning in my opinion. Like when you're talking about someone being a superstar because he was on a major winning team but he was the fourth best player, it's just nonsense to me. Like you've abused the term and actually you're not communicating information to me. You're doing the opposite. You're obfuscating what would be information to me. So the difference between star and superstar to me is a superstar is a star when they play among the other star players or against the other star players. There's a key principle. So here's the difference. If I put Xantares against normal players at the pro level, he might be a star player. Of course, he'd probably be the star player of Big. But if I put him against Nico, Simple, Kenny S, they're going to dominate him and they're going to make him look like the average player and they're going to be the superstar player. So in terms of Breeze, again, people are doing this thing where this is where you can always tell when people do single factor analysis or try to find one reason. When you say it's not because he had crazy highlights, he does, that's just not the reason why. It's because he would never miss the easy kills. He does, but that's not the only reason why. The point is, he never missed the easy kills. He could always get his game off and he would do some crazy kills, but it's just that he got such a mass of the easy and normal kills and then some of the crazy kills on top and performed the big games that as a result, it meant that it's like Cold Zero. He was just a monster. Was he the most skilled player? No, but that is not the same as being the best player, as I hope I've alluded to in this video and outlined. So it's not about aiming and spraying and all the rest of that. Like as I said with Cold Zero, like I think Cold Zero's raw skills, I'm not joking. I bet you could go to Sweden, Denmark, even Brazil and find 5 players more skilled in terms of raw mechanics. Now, even some of them, maybe they're understanding a technique. I'm not sure that because in my opinion, that's part of how Cold Zero mastered the game. I believe in terms of technique, this guy is one of the best ever. Now, Arash says, As a fan of Quake back in the day, I'm curious to know what Quake players and fans thought of Halo and the success it had around 2010-ish with MLG. With Halo returning to PC and a new game coming out this year, do you think there is any room for a slightly less hardcore AFPS game to make a pushback into the mainstream? Right, you'll notice a very common trend here, which is that people seem to think if I like a game or if a game is good, that it can be a massive mainstream game. That doesn't, at the moment, at all determine whether or not games are big esports games. What mainly determines if they're big esports games are these two primary factors. One, does the developer put millions of dollars of their own money into the game? Number two, is the raw viewership so high that all the TOs and the game developer feel it is justified to make it a number one game? Think about Overwatch League. By the logic of a lot of these questions, maybe you guys think if I took Quake Live and gave it the push that Overwatch League did, it'd be the biggest game in the world. It wouldn't. I don't even know that the viewership would go up. It maybe would double. It would never get near Counter-Strike League of Legends levels. So the business, the industry part, is the bottleneck for these games being massive. And in terms of being mainstream, it has to be incredibly popular. Do you see incredibly hardcore games that are really popular? If you even say CSGO, I think you're missing the point here, mate, because CSGO is not relevant in Asia. And even then, even in Western regions, it's not that CSGO is as enormous as League of Legends, right? And finally, and this might be a very bitter pill to swallow, I don't think CSGO is a hardcore esports game in the absolute sense. It is hardcore for what's available today. In the same sense as what's available today as a box office massive hit movie, Christopher Nolan's movies are the most hardcore art house movies you can get. But if you look at them as movies, they only mildly go into that kind of dimension. It's just that that's how watered down the scene has got. Now listen, Christopher Nolan's movies are some of my favourites. You don't have to be a hardcore art house movie. Counter-Strike is one of my favourites. But compared to Quake World or most Quakes, it's nothing. It's a little kid's game. It's just fun. Just the way it is. Doesn't mean you have to hate on it. I don't hate on the NBA, WNBA rather. I think it's garbage. I think the players are way worse. I would never watch it. But if other people want to watch it, if it wants to exist as a different field, yeah, let it. What's the problem? So what I would say is this. In terms of like how fan players thought, I'll just say this, mate. They didn't really. Like one of the cool things about Quake players, in my opinion, and to a lesser degree, CS players in the modern day, is, listen, a lot of people on forums, which is the loud, noisy, vocal minority, go on and on about the other games and the scene and esports and mainstream stuff. Most of the people who play these games, if you play Counter-Strike, you're a Counter-Strike player. If you play Quake, you're a Quake player. Back in the day, people used to ask at the best Quake World players, why don't you go pro in Quake 3? They were like, I don't like Quake 3 and I like Quake World. Yeah, but there's more money in that. It's like, I don't like Quake 3 and I like Quake World. Yeah, but you could win loads more money and be famous and you're a pro. I want to play the game I like, which is Quake World. And people would actually, no joke, including fuckers, by the way, like Carmack, would sort of just be like, they don't get it, should move with the times. It's like, no, when you move with the times, what you're saying is abandon all the really important values and principles you hold and just adapt to whatever's in vogue now, whatever the fashion of the times are. And I think if you look around the current world right now, that is the number one thing ideologically that is ruining the world, in my opinion. So I would just say, listen, there would be a few vocal minority people on forums at Yes Reality who'd say, oh, it's just shit. No one ever cared about it, by the way. No one ever liked those games. Remember, most Quake players didn't like Counter-Strike. They only liked fucking Quake, and a few of them could handle Brood War, but even then, it also looks like a kid's game if you've never got into it. And you think, well, there's no skill in it, you're not aiming, because they didn't know what like the micro was like, etc. And a lot of the nuanced tricks that don't show up on the screen, which, by the way, is vaguely similar to Counter-Strike in that sense, because the aim doesn't show up on the screen. It's actually the lack of the spray difficulty that you're mastering. So the better you are, the less it looks like you're aiming. So I would say, in fact, there's a reason why I joked the other day on Twitter that if Simple, because he transcends the game, in a few years when he retires or is at the end of his prime, someone's going to make a half-an-hour movie that's going to be like unbeatable for how insane it's going to be. And my joke is, all the people from other games who've heard, this is the faker of CSGO, they won't know CSGO, or they'll know it vaguely, and they'll watch this movie, and their first assumption will be, oh, the most OP weapon in the game is the fucking AWP, because you can just use it like a shotgun, like it has like perfect accuracy, and it's just easy. You just click on them and it always hits, because that's what this fucking guy's highlights look like. So in terms of is there any room? There's no room in as much as the industry doesn't care about these types of FPS games. And also, would Microsoft and the people behind Halo put their weight behind it and properly support a pro scene? Doesn't seem like they ever really did. And people like MLG don't seem to give a fuck anymore. Another question by Soliko. He says, how would you advise a casual fan to treat the online results? Watching the game makes me feel like the results aren't the way they ought to be. I mean, I did do a video on the online era, but what I would say is this. There's no way around it. We can't solve this Gordian-knot-esque problem. Basically, online results don't matter. They don't matter as much. And as soon as we ever have a real LAN circuit again, they will be thought of as an outlier in history, an asterisk, and most things accomplished there, rightfully so, will have an asterisk next to them. Now, we'll still have to reference them because they're still a period of history that cannot be ignored. But people won't care about them in the context that if you were the best player before the online era and after the online era, it won't matter even if you were the worst player in the online era. It will overall, it will factor in, but it won't really ever take away your overall status or fuck your career in that sense. Everyone will give you a pass in that regard. So there really is no way to solve this. Like, they don't matter. They just don't. They do in the sense that they might qualify to your lands. There you go. But that was always the case with online qualifiers, right? In terms of saying that the results aren't the way they ought to be. I mean, they are for online play. This has always been the way online play was, and it always will be. I was one of the people who nailed that years ago. But I agree with you. The results in terms of like LAN Counter-Strike that you're used to watching at Tier 1 events, these results wouldn't happen. A couple of them would, and I feel very bad for those teams because they'll never get a chance to have proven that that's what would have happened. They will always be swept under the rug with these other results. But the problem is we can't know which of those results they are. Like, what is the result that would be like Clan Mystic beating Very Games in late 2013? A legit LAN result, which it was a fluke, but wow, how did that happen? I can't tell if that's what happens when Heretics win games online or Big wins a tournament recently. I can't tell. There's no way to know, I'm afraid. We'd have to see some of it replicated online, and even then, that's somewhat fallacious thinking, and that justifies what happened before. So I'm afraid it's just a scenario that's bad for everyone. We're just making the best of a bad situation. And listen, compared to having nothing to watch, I'm grateful there is something and there is still high-level competition. It's just it doesn't matter as much. In the same way as if we were in a famine or some sort of wartime scenario where we're rationed, would that make having a bowl of porridge the best meal? Yeah, but would that mean later on, years down the line, if you had money and access to all sorts of cuisine, you would say that porridge is the best meal or look back fondly? Probably not. You know? Just a tough scenario for everyone. Shikez says, do you foresee Valorant competing with CSGO in a similar fashion as LOL competes with Dota? If a competitive scene eventually emerges, do you think you'd have an interest in creating content around it? Right, I've obviously answered the Valorant topic a lot, but I can always find different ways to answer a question. So I like the way that he's framed it, though, of like in the way that LOL competes with Dota. Now, the problem with that, remember, is that the reason League of Legends and Dota can coexist is because, one, Dota players primarily are like Quake and Counter-Strike players. They play Dota. They're not saying, I'm going to play a MOBA, could be whatever it is. What's the most popular today? What will get me the most clout and money? They go, I like Dota. So the problem in that scenario is CSGO would be the Dota in this case, right? So, which I assume is what you're trying to imply. So if we make it that Valorant is the League of Legends, listen, I might be totally wrong on this. I never claim to know what social trends will be, because a lot of those social phenomenons are like viral or snowball phenomenons where the same factors that make them go viral and snowball, if they'd have gone slightly differently but the same thing happened, it wouldn't have ever happened and it wouldn't have snowballed. It would be a tenth of the size or it'd be 10 times the size, and it could be a tiny little difference, and some of it might be factors we'll never know. So I personally, my sense is Valorant won't ever be as big as League of Legends. It won't be bigger than CSGO, so I don't think it will be the League of Legends to Dota in that regard. But I do think that it could be a side game. I don't count out entirely that it could actually occupy and do what Overwatch League should have done and be a primary esports game and maybe have like a 200k viewers game. I don't know what the number would have to be. I personally think that the fact that it's so casual is what will make it a popular game to play for fun, but it will also be what I think cripples it from having an esports. In terms of if I'd have an interest creating content around it, that's a tough one, because I only create content around games that either I'm very interested in the scene or I'm very interested in the game. So Overwatch the game, I was interested in. I don't care what anyone says. I think Overwatch is a better game than League of Legends. Now, in terms of the scene, I think League of Legends has a better scene than, for example, Quake Champions. So I actually prefer to follow the League of Legends scene than Quake Champions, even though I actually probably would prefer the game Quake Champions over League of Legends. Just I don't love Quake Champions. So in that case, I'll be following it for the scene. So the scene in Quake Champions can't compete with the League of Legends scene. So it would be more about, I would have to watch it when the first esports tournaments happened. There haven't been any yet. How can I even know what it looks like as an esport? I'm not blaming you here. I'm just saying what exasperates me is that everyone's had a million conversations about a total hypothetical that doesn't even have any basis for us to know anything about it. Imagine if this game never does anything and we wasted all these hundreds of man hours on it. So if I'm interested, I'll try doing a piece of content in it. If I like that content, I like the people I do the content with, I'll do some more content. I will never promise any of you that I will work in a game, that I will always be around a game, that I will always make content around the game. I actually think, and this is something I'll get to later, that the idea that people think that you have an obligation to them or that the people swear these obligations is just folly. Like what got me to this point wasn't doing what you told me to do or what you wanted me to do. It's just doing things that I liked on that day that made me happy, made me satisfied, quenched some thirst in me. And as long as that's there, I keep doing it. Maybe it won't always be with that game. Maybe my interests switch. And people grow over time. People change over time. Not in the way that they abandon their principles. So I would just say it's possible. Xanth says, and this is another one of those questions that I'm always a little wary about answering, but listen, I'll ask it anyway. In your videos, you've referenced the fact that you're from the Northeast, Middlesbrough specifically, as am I. What, if any, influence do you think growing up in this area had on the way you think, communicate or work? No worries if too personal. I wouldn't say, by the way, that it influenced those three things very much. I would say it influenced things that probably apply to a lot of places that are quite rough, ghettos, for example, and it's more about the things you overcome to become not like that. That's the key thing to me. The people were like, well, I'm like this because I came from this. It's like, yeah, that's an excuse, mate. That is an excuse, right? I would say things like, when you were young, if you had to return a videotape cassette, could you, walk to the shop and come home? If you say yes, you didn't have the same life as me. I would have to worry and think about my route for who was going to beat me up or harass me or make me feel bad as I went to go and return this video. And by the way, I'm not necessarily talking about people I know, just people who happen to be in that area or on the street. So things like that, I would just consider those high hurdles, challenges, obstacles to overcome. There's many more, but again, I don't go into my private life. That's just something that if people have come from the Northeast, they might be able to understand. I would just say in that sense, maybe the knock-on influence is, it doesn't matter what a TSM, an Astralis, a pro player, a fan says to me. Even if it does get to me a little bit, you'll never beat me. You'll never take my heart. You'll never stop me. You'll never make me hate or think badly of myself. You'll never do it. Because you'd have never met me or heard of me if those things were possible. Anyone who wants to call me thin-skinned or a snowflake, go for it. In the totality, at the end of my career, you will look so foolish, it's unbelievable. As in, you look like the person telling someone like, well, here's a great example, would be when they say like Peyton Manning's a choker. Right? I'll probably one day do a video on that on my side channel. He certainly had times where he underperformed and let pressure get to him. This guy has the most game-winning drives and comebacks, fourth quarter comebacks, I think, in the history of the NFL. You can't do that if you're a choker. You can't. It's impossible. By definition, you could not. So have I gone nuts on Twitter and lashed out at people and behaved in a really angry way if you don't know who I am and what I've been facing? Yeah, of course. But how can you judge if you were never in my shoes? You can, by the way. Of course, we're all judging everyone all the time. We're all giving our opinions. Point is, you won't be able to objectively, like you won't really be in search of truth there, because to get the truth, you'd have to know some of what I was going through. So I would just say that. I would also say things like, I don't overvalue money because I know what it's like to have no money. And I know that actually even having the money, it's only worth it for the status, the respect, and what you can then use it for. It isn't in itself some magic elixir that you can drink from. That's why I despise people who dare to say things like, oh, a massive celebrity with millions of dollars is crying about being depressed. Oh, boo-hoo in your mansion. Like you have lost your humanity. You are heartless. You have no compassion. Like it doesn't matter what you think. You seem to imagine not having money in your bank account makes you a saint. Having money in your bank account makes it impossible for anything to be bad for you. What a fucked ideology. You're the one who worships money, not them necessarily. Barbara Stanley's legs. Had Thresh been interested and uninjured, how do you think he would have fared against the best Quake world? I realise he played Network, so let's assume he switched over. Duelers from the last 2 decades, right? First of all, I'm not exaggerating. Quake world and Netquake were different enough, the movement differences, that I actually cannot guarantee you that someone who was the best at Netquake could be the best at Quake world. I also couldn't guarantee the other way around, by the way. So, I'm sorry, just like in Neo was the best at 1.6 and he was nowhere close to the best at CSGO. Some of the players who were the best at Quake 3 weren't the best at Quake Live. I can't guarantee that. So even that assumption is a massive assumption. But you know what? We can play a fun hypothetical. In terms of the angle of like if he hadn't have gotten uninjured or if he was interested, way more on the interested side, in my opinion. I do not buy that he was like so injured he had to. A lot of people who've had RSI have just kept playing on through it. A lot of people have changed their posture, have taken breaks. A couple of years break, you could fix most of those problems almost entirely. You could work on a lot of strength training. You could undo a lot of the... Essentially, what you're doing with these injuries is you're keeping your muscles too clenched and in activity mode and pushing them on all the time, that eventually that's the normal state. What you have to do is do exercises that unclench it, that undo that, do the opposite action, give it rest, give it nutrients. Like when I say give it rest, I don't mean 2 weeks, I mean like a year. Give it a full-time break in that regard. Change your posture, change your sitting style. In the modern day, with the better mice and the bigger mice pads, you don't have to get it even. He played back in the day when you had a tiny mouse pad, a super shit mouse, and you had a really high sense and you used your wrist for everything. That's like if a surgeon did surgery 14 hours a day. His wrist would be fucking knackered after a couple of years. That's why baseball pitchers retire with fucked arms, because they're just doing a totally unnatural action 1 billion times because they're trying to be the best that year. They're not worrying about what's going to happen 10 years from now. So I would say it's more interest. And I have to say this as well. Listen, I can't judge in terms of for them, what was important for them, what priorities were. But as much as I respect them, I still think Thresh and Fatality and 0-4, they should be in the Pantheon. If you make a top 10 players ever, they should probably be on it. But I'll say this. I do feel like it's whack that so many of them, unlike Fatality, by the way, he did come back many times. They always say in interviews, I'd be interested in, or if it was the right game, or I wish I could have, or I think I could have matched up. You didn't, and you weren't. Like, some of these guys, even Toxic. It makes Toxic had the balls to come back. Like, a lot of these guys, the reason they won't come back is because they don't want to put that rep on the line. They don't want to do what Cooler did in Quake Live and have people be able to actually say, you know what, now that I've seen you play Quake Live, I don't think you're the greatest Quake duo of all time. That's the cost that he had to pay to go for ultimate greatness, to try everything, to leave nothing on the table. And I have the infinite respect for that. I have a lot of respect still for Quake, for Thresh and 0-4 and these people who chose to bow out of the game. But all they can do is just give me a fun hypothetical of what would have happened. You didn't do it, dude. If you could have done it, I have to see it. I'm sorry. I could even myself think you'd have a good chance. But I will never say you would have been the champion over those guys. You didn't do it. They did. So how would he have fared against other duelists from the last 2 decades? He would have fared very well. I think by now, I never thought he had the sickest aim, so I think he would have had a hard time in that respect. But if he'd have kept updating his game, he could have still been... I think maybe just below... He could have been like Rafa Light in the modern day. Listen, that'll sound like a diss if he ever watches this video, but again, do it, dude. Go and prove me wrong. Like, you were champion in like the late 90s. This guy was a champion like 2 decades later, so... I think he would have a chance to be like a Rafa if everything worked out. But that would also depend how he adapted to it, how he handled the circuit. He had a totally different circuit back then. There's a million factors that wouldn't apply to him back then that would apply now. And so being a champion now is about having at least something in those factors or being able to offset your weaknesses. I'd certainly love to see it though, because I always loved watching very intelligent players, Cooler, Rafa, etc. Underill says, how do you think Steel from Chaos would fare as the IGL of a team like Liquid or EG if he was unbanned from majors? Right, I've got good and bad news. I would really love to see it. I think it would be really fun. I actually think of the 2 teams, Liquid would be the more obvious one because he's got more experienced players. I think his loose calling style would work pretty well for them. I think he wouldn't frag very well. I think he would frag much worse in that team because I think he would actually help set these players up more. But I think in that sense, he'd be a bit like a Carrigan and he'd have a lot of success. I think he could, the sky's the limit with those rosters. You could go to the absolute top. You could win majors. You could have an era. What I would say though is, I don't think it would automatically be as good as you guys think it would. Like, I actually think that because he's working with broken players or lesser players, That's a different skill set to working with superstar players. In the same way as if you give Phil Jackson the worst roster in the NBA, I don't think he'd make the playoffs with them. If you give him the best roster or one of the best, he'll make them the greatest team ever. If you are working with, this is actually one of the things I think always is lost. So think of some of the people who've been very maligned in coaching, rightly so when they had the best teams. Tom Thibodeau, maybe even Rick Adelman. These guys in their own right could be god tier coaches with lesser talent and worse players. Like their understanding of coaching and teaching and using people and creating systems is very impressive. So I would say it's like that. I think Steele, realistically, even if unbanned, probably shouldn't get one of those teams. I know there's a lack of IGLs in NA, so in that sense he should. But if you want to look at the whole global scene where you can recruit anyone as your IGL, he should probably, in my opinion, be the in-game leader of a team like Gen G. Who else? Maybe North. This level of teams. That would be fair, I feel like, for both parties. Istar says, which of your reflections or grilled series took the longest time to prepare for and why? Right, obviously I'm going to have to go off memory here. So, maybe the one I did with... I think maybe the one I did, like that 5-hour 2-part one I did with Seb from OG, because I only watched Dota as a fan. So I had to go and do a lot of research. And when I do research for guys like that, I sometimes really do just download everything into my brain and structure it and think about it and watch extra games and watch tons of interviews that I never even used stuff from. There's an example of one where I really went ham. That was like the original Grilled interviews where I went super deep on some of these guys. If it's a game like CSGO, I might do some research. Some of the players, I just lived it. I was there with them. I know all these things. I've even talked to them tons of times. That's more about having an interesting conversation and getting to some of the big points, but not necessarily knowing every detail. That's probably one. You could obviously say the one I did with myself, because I had to do both parts. I had to prepare for it. I had to figure out how I was going to film the different segments and me responding and stuff. Like there was more went into that than you'd realise. There's some craft to some of these things. Jack Feeney says, hello Thorin, what are your thoughts on maps being T or CT sided? Recently Sponge mentioned that he believes CS maps should be CT sided inherently. Do you agree, or would you rather they be a balance of both or not favouring either side? I would say, and if you've listened to any of my videos where I address the Counter-Strike 1.6 map pool, I want there to be a balance, but I think the balance should be skewed in favour of CT. As in, say we have a 7 map pool. I want 2, maximum 3 maps to be T-sided. I'd hope more like 2. I wouldn't mind 1 or 2 hybrid, but then I want like 4 or 5 to be CT-sided. And the reason why is this. T-sided maps tend to be ones that it's not that the Ts are better and are favoured, it's that it is impossible to play a great CT side. I would compare it, if you know the analogy, to playing defense in the NFL now. In the context of the current rules, you can be the best defensive team, but even the best defensive team now would not be the best defensive team 10 years ago. And that's because since they changed the rules, it became impossible to play truly lockdown defense like the 2000 Ravens, like the Bears back in the 80s. You just can't do it. It is not possible. They don't allow it. So in the same sense, I think the economy and the way CSGO as a game operates makes it so that CTs cannot play perfect CT sides no matter what. They're always gambling. It's like the Protoss race in StarCraft. It can only be OP or the one that has to walk a tightrope where it's either you win or it's sudden death at every moment in a way that the other races just do not have. So there's way more room for error with the other ones. So I would say that's why I understand it and I would agree with his sentiment that the best CS, the best version of CS will be one where most maps are CT sided. That means that actually there's enough options for the CTs that they can lock down the game when they do it correctly. So I would say, like as a result, think of the most T-sided maps. Dust 2 is traditionally it. At times Cache. These maps just allow people with skill to abuse the other people no matter what they're doing to some degree. That's not great Counter-Strike. It should be available so that upsets and so that teams can play off skill, but it shouldn't be the most rewarded in my opinion. At times in CS, we've come too close to that. And the current economy goes way too close to that in my opinion. Right, this is a question I'm not going to answer, but I'll ask it so that people who might be interested similarly would know why I won't answer it. So JDubs, who's been a loyal supporter, said, you've published more reflections and interview videos lately, some of which you note were recorded 2 years ago. Is the delay because other projects took precedence or something else? And what is your general philosophy on identifying who to interview and when? I'll answer the latter part. That's a good question. I don't blame you. It's a question I'd be curious about if I was a fan. But as a point of principle, I don't answer why I don't release interviews that I recorded anything beyond, pick a date in your mind, 30 days, 2 weeks, 2 days, pick whatever you think the cutoff should be, just in your subjective opinion for when I should release my interviews. Now, whatever that date is, I don't agree with it, and I don't agree there is a date. Now, there are certainly interviews where I actually, maybe even publicly in the future, but privately have messaged the person and said, I actually apologise for how late this interview is. I don't give them a reason, I just say I apologise for it. I would have intended, or rather, it'd come out sooner. But I'm not going to get into the reasons because, again, I don't have an obligation to the public to release free interviews for them on the timing they would like. I don't have an obligation to explain why my life or my career has gone the way it has and these things were released. And so because I don't, I make it a point of principle to not pander to people, to not sell my integrity and my principles, to answer that question when I believe you do not have an obligation to it. It would be a gift if I did it. And I know, sadly for some of you guys from past experience, that if I did explain it, it would make my life harder. And I am not looking to make my life unnecessarily harder. So all I'll say on that one is we're not going to answer that. But in terms of my general philosophy on identifying who to interview and when, it's going to be quite boring for you, but it's the truth. I just see who I think of. I think, right, let's do a few interviews next week. Right, who would be fun to interview, right? Well, a historical person, Matt, I was recently thinking about this guy. Let's message him. Someone who would be very topical. Man, maybe this guy's up for it. You know what? I've never talked to this guy, actually. I have some curious things, curious holes in his career. Maybe I'll ask that guy. It's really that simple. And if they say yes, the interview happens. And if they say no, you guys will never know there was an interview request. It's okay. Again, nothing against the question being asked. It's perfectly reasonable. Just as I'd hope my answer is perfectly reasonable. Julius, how did you discover that you wanted to work in what would become esports, and how did you join the field? Right, I'll tell you this. There is an upcoming interview that I've done with James Banks for Jinx TV, which is a UK TV, I think, cable channel or something, which basically answers this question in a lot more depth. So I'll give you a brief summary here. Basically, I didn't. I started doing it even as a hobby. Even then, I just planned on putting a couple of interviews up and never do anything else. I had never at any point in time any intention to go full time in it. It just happened organically. I kept trying to improve. I kept enjoying it. I kept doing more things. Opportunities came. I took some good decisions. I took some bad decisions. I endured. There was enough about the game. More importantly, I had flipped the switch and started to learn how to bring outside things in to make the game itself more interesting and think in new ways other people didn't. So I wasn't just taking and having the game provide me with interest. I was making the game more interesting. I would say there's some of that involved in it. And in terms of how I joined the field, like I say, coincidentally, in terms of when I discovered I wanted to work in it, I just found I was one day. And other things happened elsewhere in my life. There was deficits and things that went out of my life that meant that this just became the primary focus. This just was what I did. And also, I had inspiration along the way from many different things that changed who I was as a person, and my work ethic and my discipline and how I approached things and how I made things interesting. Obviously, can't go into too much detail on those. Here's the thing, maybe when I have a side channel, these are the sorts of things I might make videos on. I'm actually probably going to start doing content. It'll be free content, don't worry. I'm not going to charge a course or anything. Where, in the future I might write a book where it'll be about how do you improve your mindset? What is my process for working? How did I come to certain conclusions? How do I see certain scenarios that have nothing to do with esports? I'll probably do that in the future. I've teased at it, but it's actually on the horizon now. We're talking a month or two away. Calvin Satyakam says, players like Ambition and Perks have changed roles and found great successes in League of Legends. Does this change how players should be critiqued and compared to their peers? For consideration, has the bar for ADC been lowered, or can Faker win Worlds playing jungle? I'll just say this. Let's be real. Right now, Faker can't win Worlds playing mid lane, so that's an issue right there. Also, did Caps almost win Worlds or win MSI because he was ADC? I would say he won those tournaments or almost won them because he had Caps as a mid laner. There's the key difference. Was he better than him? Maybe at times, but overall, he had god-tier teammates in every other position. So it's not impossible Faker could, but to be fair, Ambition wasn't someone who deserved a Worlds Championship or something. He got one, and I would say it's one of the fluke ones, but he got one. So I don't think of games that way, as in like how good you are means you deserve to win, or that if you won, you were the good enough and therefore deserved it. I also don't think changing roles does change my opinion on how good they are or how important that role is, etc. Because some of these people get good at a short period of time. Ambition wasn't a monster elite jungler for years and years and years. Score was, and he is the massive outlier in that regard. Certain supports were, and that's what made them massive outliers. You notice there wasn't a lot of like key traditional carry role position changes. So I don't actually think that the bar for ADC has been lowered, etc. I think the ADC just wasn't as emphasised in the meta at the time, and it only had a couple of champions you had to be as good at. I think there's a lot that went on with that role. Again, maybe some other content in the future. Matrim says, assuming all maps were competitively viable, would you be in favour of a larger map pool? I don't think so. Like, personally, I think 7 is the maximum you should ever have. I've already pointed this out in other in my videos in the past. I hope I can fucking link all these. I've put my finger up a million times now. My biggest problem is, I don't think you can, even in a 7 map pool, I think you have to be a god to even be good at 6. I mean, really good. Not good like you can play it against the bad teams. I mean, good as in you play at tier 1 and you can play the other tier 1 teams, including teams where that might be their second or third best map, and you can have a chance against them. You have to be one of the greatest teams of all time, typically, to be able to do that, in my opinion. Or you're just decent at all of them, and you're not godlike enough on the sick maps to be the best team. So I would say no, 7's enough. I even wouldn't hate it if we went back to 5 maps, quite frankly. I think you would actually see the level of play rise a lot, and you would see some incredible series and matchups in the way that you don't now. It's just, here's the problem. What I enjoy about the current map pool is it allows teams who don't just sit in the current meta of how little teams sometimes practice and watch demos and just be the best. It means that some teams can be the best, like Astralis. I would even say people like Big can overperform because they put in the extra work and put in extra strat time, and even allows people like the I'm a Pets of the world to gain edges where they wouldn't otherwise have them. So I like that. I like that there's extra ways to be good. It's not necessarily just Counter-Strike. It's about study and being a pro and preparation. But I think that's cool. That can be a factor as well. So I probably wouldn't put it over 7. I might even try an experimental league with 5. Maybe one day I'll get a chance to do Flashpoint, right? Maybe I'll do an invitational to show you what I mean. Shantanu Pawar says, according to you, what makes a great interview? Your last 3 interviews, obviously when this was submitted, DSN, Lecro and Alex, felt smooth as butter, but on the other hand, the one you did with FM Porn was very frustrating. He just won't answer your questions. I remember you asking him, how does a map get in a competitive map pool in 6 different ways, and he still wouldn't answer. Yeah, I'm with you. That was an example of just where the person on the other end just won't play ball in a certain regard. Those other people absolutely were playing ball. Those were people who wanted to do interviews. Those people who were totally open to it. And as a result, they didn't feel like anything was off limits. They didn't feel like attacked or anything. This guy came into that interview, I would speculate, with an agenda, which was to try and push the community and potentially Valve in a certain way. And so when I asked questions that effectively would have exposed or put him at danger of Valve not liking his answers, he just wouldn't answer. Now, I can't do anything about that. I actually don't think there was even a different approach I could have taken to get that out of him. He just wasn't going to talk about that. There are interviews that were probably awkward, I did, by the way, where it was on me. I probably failed. But I would say when they go really smoothly, it's because objectively, I am one of the best interviewers ever in esports. And I have put a lot of time into it, and I've advanced my process a lot, and I've acquired a wide toolkit that I can use. That's why people who think I talk too much in my questions, or talk too much on talk shows, or that I interrupt people on talk shows, except beyond when 2 people try and talk at the same time, they just don't understand. What they're screaming to you is, I don't know his process. And even though I really love the actual outcome of what the other person says, I somehow can't acknowledge that what he did played a role in it. So if that's the case, I don't feel obliged to respond to those people. So I would just say, I have a lot of skills at interviewing. A lot of it I learned intuitively. I built my own theory of mind, essentially, my own processes. I took some things, stole some things from great people, tried to figure out other people's techniques. But I also have built my own fully comprehensive approach to interviewing. Maybe that one day could be a book, a pamphlet, maybe a free video. I wouldn't mind doing it. I would never worry, by the way, as a general rule. I don't worry about giving the secrets of the universe away. Because when you find them, you discover they were there all along and that they were all obvious. It's just that you had to go through certain experiences to show you why the other things weren't the right approach, and that was always it. And that's why if you tell the person the sentence, it doesn't mean anything to them. We're all one. That means nothing to you if you haven't gone through the experiences that make my version of we're all one mean what it means. And to explain it, I could give you an incredible explanation and you still couldn't get there. It would be like me explaining what having sex with a woman is like in this scenario that I have sex with women if you had never had sex with a woman. You can get as close as you like in the mind. You'll never be close to what the actual experience was like. Kristen says, I really enjoyed seeing Jampi play. I just say that because I saw this Finn said, Jampi. Do you think that there is a reasonable chance of him winning his lawsuit against Valve and his lifetime ban being overturned? If his ban is lifted due to legal reasons, do you think we see Valve shy away from issuing lifetime bans for VAC bans in the future? Sadly, I don't think there's actually a reasonable chance. Like, I would put the chances of his ban getting overturned at... Now, here's the problem. If you know much about the court system, which I don't, but I know a small enough amount to know I don't know a lot, which is a lot more than most people as far as I can tell, there is a chance of many things happening in a courtroom because it's the jury and because it's a judge. So I would guess from that, it's like heads up. It's like going heads up all in before the flop in poker. The best you can be is like what, like an 8 to 9 to 1 favourite. There'll always be a chance still, so like 10% chance minimum that they can still win with the worst cards in the game. Even the stupidest case ever that should have no merit and no base can be won, not least by corruption, by the way. That probably is what skews it, not even just reasonable analysis. So I would say that gives him a chance, but in terms of like a likelihood, I don't think the likelihood's over 30%. So I would say it won't happen, and especially because, as you allude to, it will probably open the floodgates and become a massive precedent. So I think that if Valve really cared, they'd put a massive legal team on this and crush him flat or drag him out for years. I think they don't care and that they know it's not going to happen. So they're just going through the formalities. They're just going through the motions, phoning it in, and they will win anyway. Sadly, I do think it's necessary that we smash these IP rights of the game devs. I've made a video about it in the past, and I think one day it will happen, but I think it will happen when esports is $1 trillion business, or could be, and therefore business interests are there enough that people get together with massive legal teams and they fight these battles and they beat these companies. Even then, I don't know if they can, because if people, I would just say this, if you're interested in knowing why I don't know if you can, if the people you're fighting are powerful and have enough money, because the system is rigged for them, by the way, they built it to be rigged for them if you have a look in the history of it. I would just say this, go and look into the cases of Disney extending copyrights and making it so that things like Mickey Mouse don't enter the public domain. If you look into how that has happened and how that hasn't been beaten yet, it will give you a clue as to how these IP rights will probably never be beaten for the game devs, even though I sincerely hope they are one day. Right, I'm going to make that it for now. There was a whole bunch more questions, but I'm going to put out the next one way sooner than I will otherwise, and don't bother submitting the same questions again, but look in the description box of this video and you'll see the next AMA thread. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Bobby, Dean Tanglis, Istar, JDubs, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, Soliko, Spencer Green, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in those AMAs I do each month. Do you want teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions about esports with me. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.